Yeah, now live.
Great, thanks.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the afternoon session. I would like to invite the council's team to come in now and basically respond to the points that have been made from the previous parties in the morning sessions.
Good. Thank you very much, sir. So can I'll just go through the bullet points in or your Roman numerals on your 3.3. The first, willingness to implement site on the basis of the relevant policy. So there doesn't seem to be any dispute about that. You've heard from one of the developers. You know, even though they're not here today, you've seen from our evidence that in relation to SA12, the developers there are signed up. In my submission, you can clearly put a tick in that box. 2, safe and secure access. There's been only one question raised, and it was a question rather than an objection relating to the pedestrian access. That's been answered helpfully by Ms. Sargent just before the lunch break. Again, sir, no other challenge to that. You can put a tick in that box. Item 3, neighbourhood plan. So it's probably worth just stepping back before one gets to the question whether there is a conflict with a neighbourhood plan, to remind ourselves of what it is, A, that national policy says, and B, that the district plan itself says. There's a sequence of events there which provides for a later plan to take precedence over an earlier plan. You know, in the present case, when the relevant neighbourhood plans were made, but what is particularly clear from the district plan is that in terms of meeting the overall need that was identified, that would be done not only through allocations within neighbourhood plans, but also within a site allocations DPD. There are numerous references to the need for an SA-DPD in the district plan. And inevitably, sir, if it falls to the SA-DPD to make allocations, those are not going to be allocations that are in a neighbourhood plan, but nonetheless, it clearly presupposes that that would be an appropriate thing to do. So even if there were, and I put it that way quite deliberately, even if there were a conflict, that would not, in my submission, be a reason for finding that the SA-DPD is unsound. However, sir, in the present case, there isn't and there cannot be a conflict for the reasons that I outlined in my opening comment, and Ms. Sargent picked up on in her response as well. And quite simply, so you can't have a conflict with the neighbourhood plan when there isn't a neighbourhood plan for the area or the site concerned. If one looks at the particular parts of the neighbourhood plan to which you were taken by Dr. Bowes, those aren't in fact part of the policies of the neighbourhood plan. They're part of the text associated with it. But even then, even if they were policies, they only apply within the neighbourhood plan area. Dr. Bowes says the plan represents a shared vision, but it's a shared vision which has a boundary, and it's not because it's outside the remit of Burgess Hill to have drafted its plan to include Boulders Lane. Boulders Lane falls squarely within the area of Burgess Hill. They could have included it if they wanted to. They didn't. Their opportunity to express a shared vision was there, and they chose not to take it. So the argument that at this stage there is a conflict with the neighbourhood plan simply doesn't stack up in my submission. For the same reasons, you can put a tick in relation to 3. So under item 4, national policy, aside from matters such as South Downs National Park and landscape, which we'll come to under your later headings, the only discrete point that was raised in the oral submissions by SOFLAG in relation to national policy was coalescence. And so my first answer to that would be, if you can find a reference in the NTPF to coalescence, then good luck to you. As far as I'm aware, it's not actually a part of national policy that local authorities should be striving to avoid coalescence. It's an issue which the importance of which varies from one place to another, but it's not an issue that's covered by national policy. But in any event, for the reasons that we've outlined in our written statement, but in particular, Ms. Sargent took you through, and I respectfully adopt her submissions on that. As a matter of fact, there is not a genuine concern about coalescence here. So you, I know, have seen the site. You'll doubtless see it again if you feel you need to. It may be a relatively small indicator, but so one of the things that you may have seen is the point at which you go past the "Welcome to Burgess Hill" sign as you are entering Burgess Hill. And that is some stage before you actually get to either SA12 or SA13. The outer edge of Burgess Hill, at least in terms of the approaches on public highways, is clearly signposted well before then. I simply put that in as an additional point. But so that's a judgment you can make on the ground. For the reasons that Ms. Sargent outlined in our submission, there isn't a concern about coalescence here. So the next item, 5, significant infrastructure considerations. The major concern that's been raised by SOFLAG here relates to transport. And so this is an area where I'm going to call in some help. We have Guy Parfitt from West Sussex County Council here, and I'm going to call him and ask him if he could respond in particular to the points that have been raised about the way in which the assessment is done. Tempro v Sistra, does Tempro adequately count in the proper level of growth? I'd also be grateful if he could pick up the comments that have been made about the A23, the junction improvements that are or are not necessary there, what drives the need for those junctions, and in particular where the development of the SA12 and SA13, which, as has already been pointed out, are on the other side of Burgess Hill, have any relationship with those, and then the other two more local junctions that have been mentioned in that regard. Mr. Parfitt, welcome. The stage is yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Welcome to our proceedings, Mr. Parfitt.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you. I can hear you, but I can't speak.
Hear me okay?
Yeah.
I can hear you okay, or I could.
I'm not hearing a response to that question.
Sometimes we can hear you, sometimes we can't.
Hello. Yeah, so if everybody can hear me, I'll go through.
Could you just hold on a moment, please?
The point. The points that yes, Brown said, but I'm familiar with the points which have been raised, which we'll go through.
Right, I can see you now, Mr. Parfitt. That's better.
Guy, can you turn your camera off?
I will go through the points which have been raised on.
Okay.
Had exactly the wrong effect. So.
Hello. Yes. If you can hear me now, for
I can
for
hear
the
you.
For the A23 junction.
Right, you're breaking up, so I'm only hearing bits of your sentences.
I've got some. Yeah. Yes. So I'm getting meeting alert. The host has asked us to start your internet service thing. Yeah.
What I'm going to suggest is that Mr. Parfitt, we
shall I
to him if he exits and rejoins, perhaps We can either wait for that, or I can go on and deal with some of the later points and come back to him when he's rejoined.
Yeah, why don't you go on to one of your further points, Mr. Brown?
Yeah, thank you. That's so. Thank you. Well, I'll do that with apologies for the way the technology's let us down. So the next on your list that I wanted to pick up, Roman 6, is significant impact on living conditions. So the only argument that's been advanced by SOFLAG in that regard relates to the impact on what I think would crudely describe as the loss of views from existing residences. And so on that, I say two things. Firstly, I gratefully adopt what Ms. Sargent has said, that I mean, that frankly goes with new allocations to meet need. But I would take that one stage further and question whether that is in fact what is meant by significant impact on the living conditions of neighbouring occupiers. Usually when one sees those words, one is thinking in terms of loss of sunlight, daylight, one is thinking about noise impact, one is thinking about overlooking issues, one is thinking about whether new development is going to be overbearing in views. In my submission, if one looks at impact on living conditions in that more conventional sense, it's quite plain that there is no adverse impact. But if insofar as it's said that the loss of outlook is an impact on conditions, so you're very well aware of the general principles of planning law in that regard, loss of a view is not a material consideration. And as Ms. Sargent has pointed out, in cases like this, that goes with the territory. It cannot be a legitimate consideration in relation to a legitimate complaint against a new housing allocation. So in terms of point 7, landscape, I'm extremely grateful to Ms. Sargent for taking you through the assessment that her team have produced, because it anticipates many of the points that I was going to make. Since she's done that, I don't need to, but what I would like to do is just to pick up on where we are with the National Park Authority, and in particular respond to the way in which this was put by Mr. Black in his comments, where he suggested that following the exchange this morning, the message that you should take away is that the current allocation hasn't been led or driven by any considerations of landscape. That the council, it was said, had not done that work. And he described my position this morning as reluctance to do it. So with respect, that is a complete travesty of where we are, and it is certainly not an accurate reflection of the discussion this morning. I begin with the observation that at 300 dwellings for a site this size, the density figure is somewhere between 19 and 20. And so you will readily appreciate that that is a very low density, generally speaking, for a greenfield development. The simple reason why it is that low is because the council has not gone in with a number and then tried to do the landscape assessment. The number has been arrived at with full and proper regard to the sensitivity of this site in terms of its proximity to the South Downs National Park. The reason for the discussion, so that's the first point. The second point, sir, is from our statement of common ground with the National Park, they do not object to the policy. They said this morning they don't object to the principle, but in fact, sir, it goes further than that. They do not object to the policy. They haven't said, we don't object to the principle, but we're unhappy with the number and we object to that part of the policy. They don't have an objection to the policy. What they have said, and what the statement of common ground says, is that they will work with us in terms of the detailed development of the site. And so our understanding, as reflected in the statement of common ground, is that they are satisfied that that gives them the protection that they require, that the ultimate layout will be led by landscape concerns, and they will work with us on that. So the discussion that we had this morning, and the reason why I was reluctant to commit to anything, stemmed from your question to South Downs National Park, which I suspect picked up on the hesitancy or the concern that they had about the overall level of development. And I understand, given the way that their evidence was presented this morning, why you picked up on that. I do, again, stress that was expressed within the context of a situation where they have not objected to SA12 or SA13. But so your question, which was directed not to the council, not asking us to do work, but to them, was could they put a number, a reasonable figure on what they would be regard as satisfactory? And so you suggested, again, understandably, that's a matter on which it might be helpful if they liaised with us. And so my reason for expressing hesitancy this morning about that is because it wasn't clear to me where that was likely to go or what the value of that would be. And I say that, sir, in circumstances where not only is there no objection from South Downs to the figure of 300 as expressed, but so far we have not seen anything from South Downs National Park by way of evidence that the site cannot accommodate 300. Still less have we seen any work from them which actually indicates what level of development might be permissible. And so that stands in stark contrast to the work that Ms. Sargent's clients have produced, which, as far as we are concerned, largely corroborates the position that is set out in the plan of 300 dwellings. I mean, it postdates the SADPD. It wasn't part of the evidence base on which we formulated the policy, but it is evidence which corroborates the conclusion to which we had come. And so my concern was whether or not it was actually going to be possible for the park to come back with a figure, explain it to us. In other words, whether there would in fact be anything to be gained by asking them to carry out that exercise. And part of the reason for my concern in that regard related to the way in which the park answered your questions on that. And you gave them two opportunities to answer it, and on neither occasion did they come back with a clear figure. And that's not a criticism of them. I can well understand why they haven't come back with a figure. They haven't come back with a figure, sir, because they haven't done work which enables them to come up with a different figure. And indeed, sir, in the coffee break, as I promised we would, we've spoken to them. I don't know if there's anybody from the park still on the line. If there is, they can correct me if I'm wrong. But what I'm told about that conversation is that actually the park does not believe it can come back to you with a different figure to 300, certainly not within the timescales anticipated by this plan. So my position on numbers is that as matters stand, you have a figure of 300 in the plan, which has been looked at on the basis of the sensitivity of the site. You have a figure of 300, which is corroborated by the evidence produced by the developer. You have a figure of 300, which is not objected to by the South Downs National Park. And you have a figure of 300 where the South Downs National Park has indicated that it is happy on that basis that its concerns can be addressed by working with the local planning authority in reviewing the application as and when it comes in. And so on that basis, I say there simply isn't an evidential basis for coming back and putting a different figure into the plan. That's not the National Park Authority's position, and it's certainly not ours. So at that stage, I think I probably, if Mr. Hartwick is back online, I see he is. I'm going to ask him if he would to come in. Hopefully his connection is better than it was before, and see if he can deal with the transport issues that I asked him about. Guy, please.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Hopefully you can hear me better this time. Yeah, I think I was experiencing some poor connectivity at the wrong time there, because I was also getting sound broken up on the other end before. But I will now take the various transport points. So to deal first of all with the A23, A2300 junction at Hickstead. I'm in agreement with what Mr. Muirhead said, that it is separate from the or not strongly connected to the impacts from these sites SA12 and SA13 because of its distance from these sites. The impact was assessed at that location as severe, taking into account the whole site allocations document, but the vast majority of the impacting traffic through that junction is from the science park. The pattern of distribution of traffic from the east side of Burgess Hill, it's a small component which gets to the A23 by means of going through Burgess Hill town centre and finding its way onto the A2300s. Traffic heading towards the north is more likely to take other routes, initially staying to the east side of the rail line and then joining the A272, and then there's various choices of routes to join the A23 towards Gatwick and the M25 from there. Also, in the last few weeks and months, much more progress has been made, and we do think there's deliverable solutions for that junction. As I say, that's related to the science park, so we'll go into the details of the proposals there when we're discussing SA9, the science park on a later date. But there has been a lot of work that's gone on since the County Council made its response to the Regulation 19 consultation. So turning to the matter of Tempro growth, this, I understand it was a point relating to the assessment of the site, which was undertaken by the site promoters team, which was reviewed by my colleague in Highways Development Control, Stephen G, for the County Council, relating to the site. I also agree with the response made by Mr. Muirhead on those points, that the County Council accepted the methodology for taking into account background growth and the committed developments in the area, notably including the consented Clayton Mills site. And we do think the assessment of the junctions on Kemah Road it is robust and appropriate. I will add one further point, in that Mr. Muirhead referred to removing the appropriate number of dwellings for the committed developments from Tempro and then adding them in as commitments to the junction assessments. The point I wish to make on that is, although the number of dwellings remains the same by taking them out and putting them back in, that is a more intensive test of the junctions, because what Tempro is looking at is the effect on growth of traffic across the road network, across the district, from the number of homes across the whole district, which effect is necessarily dispersed when it comes to X number of dwellings. So by adding them back in specifically for the location of the committed sites near to the junction, that is a greater level of traffic being assessed through the junction than if it had been purely on Tempro. And I do think that sort of outweighs any differences in the amount of homes being delivered across the whole district when you're looking at the performance of the junctions of Kemah Road, Folders Lane, and Kemah Road, Station Roads. So I'll turn now to the question of cumulative impacts, and going back to the strategic study, the SISTRA study. We do think the methodology on that is appropriate. It's standard transport planning methodology to include commitments within the reference case. So again, we do think it is cumulative, because one thing has followed after another. The other development that is current in the area has not been ignored. It's been added in specifically to the model, but as it's a commitment, it is the practice that gets included in the reference case, and as also noted, that has been agreed with Highways England as well. So that is not purely the county council's position. I will agree that there is limited scope to add to the traffic capacity for those junctions, certainly working within highway boundaries and limits, and we're not proposing to go beyond highway boundaries and limits to increase the amount of car traffic going into Burgess Hill town centre during the peak. So it comes down to the sustainability of the site and the site location, and its relationship to public transport, walking, and cycling. SA13 is within easy walking distance of the rail station and the town centre. SA12 is a little bit further out, but it's still within cycling distance, and at 40 dwellings, it falls below the level where even a transport statement, let alone a full transport assessment, would be required at planning application stage. So the mitigation is through collecting contributions to improve sustainable transport in the area, and this is resulting in items in the county council's strategic transport improvements plan to bring forward improvements for buses in the town centre and interchanging with the rail station, and to improve bus stop facilities, and also at a planning application stage, we will go further into the details of how pedestrians and cyclists, how improvements can be brought forward to them. So we do think there's a good prospect of bringing forward appropriate sustainable transport improvements that there aren't designs for those in the strategic study. I will concede that, but there's no fundamental reasons why an appropriate package would not be deliverable. And we do think the sustainable transport, we do consider sustainable transport reductions in the strategic study are based on a quite conservative estimates of what could be done in a location such as this. People may be more inclined to change their travel patterns because there is some local congestion at those junctions, whereas there is a good rail service from Burgess Hill, and there are local bus routes. There are frequent rail services available from the station, not only to London, Gatwick, and Croydon, but to a variety of other towns in the area, notably including Brighton and Worthing. So we do think there is a good prospect of achieving the desired or required sustainable mode share for these allocations, and I would submit that if SA13, for example, was removed and we sought to replace it with an equivalent number of homes elsewhere in the district, I doubt very much whether a site would be found which was as closely related to a station which offers as good service as Burgess Hill within a equivalent easy to reach distance.
Is that everything that you wanted to cover? It covers everything I wanted. I hope expecting you to deal with this topic, but was there anything you wanted to add?
Just reviewing my notes. No, I think I've covered all the points which I wanted to make. Thank you.
If you're comfortable with that, good. All right.
Just stay on the line for a minute. I don't want to lose you. I just wanted to ask on this question of modal share. You say achieve a sustainable modal or mode share. Are you able to put any more detail on that as to what you feel would be realistic, what you actually could achieve?
Well, it's set out in the strategic transport study. What reduction in vehicle trips has been assumed as realistic for the area as a result of changing to sustainable modes. As I said, I do think that's reasonably conservative, but I wouldn't want to quote a different higher figure as the maximum for what we see as being achievable, because that might be kind of plugging figures out rather than quoting something with a weight of evidence. Yeah.
Can you just remind me what the figure was at the moment, what the conservative figure is?
Yes.
Or give me the reference of the document, so I'll find it myself.
It is the Mid Sussex strategic transport study for the site allocations, the DPD scenario.
Told it's page 15 of E7. Is that?
I'm sorry, of E7.
T for transport, or T for traffic.
I'm sorry, T7.
Sorry, the copy of the document which I had open during the connectivity issues I was having later. The pages have gone blank later in the document, so I'm just.
Oh God. So it's document T7, page 15. Does any of your colleagues know the answer to my question, Mr. Parfit?
Second, we'll be able to check that.
With a paragraph reference, taking up time now, or I mean, entirely on your hands.
Table 7.
Table 7, I'm told.
Page 15.
So I've got page 15, I've got table 7, and it's document T7, yeah?
Correct, sir.
Yep.
Oh, well, I'll find it from that. So thank you, Mr. Parfit.
Yep. Yeah.
Oh,
Okay. Thank you.
right. Okay, Mr. Brown, back to you.
So I think that really left me with the last 2-3 points on your list: Roman 8, Roman 9, well, there isn't really an issue on contamination or ground stability issues. So as far as impact on conservation areas, heritage assets, or archaeological significance are concerned, I've got nothing to add to the points that are made by Ms. Sargent in her submission. I mean, it has been looked at in some detail, not just a sort of desktop survey, but a more detailed analysis, and you have the benefit of that work. And I tuck in behind the conclusions that are drawn there. So as far as access to shops, school, health provision and services concerned, I mean, you've heard the views in terms of walking distances. The general concern raised there about the availability of schools, I don't mean this disrespectfully to SOFLAG, but so that is frankly the issue that arises with almost every significant housing allocation in this district. It's a point that the council is very, very well aware of. There are tried and tested means of addressing that through Section 106 contributions on sites that aren't large enough to make on-site provision. With the strategic allocation, some of them, there are requirements that they will make on-site provision for new schools, doctors, surgeries, and so on and so forth. Inevitably, with all of these things, as the local planning authority, we will be keen to make sure that the growth in the number of houses is matched by adequate provision of services. I understand why it's a concern to local residents, but it's one that will be very much in the forefront of the council's assessment when it looks at the planning applications. But the reality is that you could pick this development up and put it down in any settlement in the district, and you would hear exactly the same concerns being raised by local residents. There is a way of dealing with it, and the council will deal with it in that way. So on that basis, I think that's everything that I would want to say by way of response. I've noticed that Dr. Bowes wants the last word on the last word. So,
Dr. Bowes, do come in.
Well, no, Mr. Brown must have the last word, of course. I just wanted to come back very briefly on one short point of Mr. Parfex, if I may. And it's simply this, that he told you that he thought there was good potential for a mode shift with sustainable transport measures. So mode shift to more sustainable transport measures other than private car with sustainable transport measures. And he said, well, that may well be better than whatever indeed is said at table 7 of page 15 of document T7. You'll explore that in your time. You'll note though, sir, he told you that his reason for having that confidence was because of existing congestion in the area. And then he also conceded that there was no design for those sustainable transport measures before the examination in the in the strategic transport study or otherwise. So of course, you're left with the situation that if those sustainable transport measures do not come forward, or they come forward and they don't sustain the mode shift for which he's suggesting, well then you're left with an existing congested situation, his words, not ours, and on his evidence, which we don't dispute, these developments will add materially to that. So I just wanted to highlight what you were being told there by the Highways Authority and how that was actually resonating rather than being discordant with what we were having to say. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So I beg your pardon. I'm sorry. Mr. New, who's not with me in the room, but has through some mode of communication managed to tell me he has a point or two he'd like to come back on what Mr. Parfek says. You content for him to do that? Would this be an appropriate?
Yes, I'll allow that.
I'm grateful. Thank you.
Mr. New. Good afternoon, Mr. New.
Yes, good afternoon. You can see me?
I can hear you.
Oh, right.
I'll make do with hearing. I can see you now.
Excellent, excellent.
Wonders revealed.
Right. Two responses to comments made by Mr. Parfek there. First one, most important one, the A2300 improvement. I think it's commonly agreed that the second improvement, that's site S2 in the sister report, is associated with science and technology part. The first improvement, S1, is not. It's S1 which is the critical element to unlocking capacity in the network to accommodate the DPD allocations. It's S1 which is the widening of the A23 south of the junction. There's no suggestion in the sister report, nor would we make such a suggestion that that is associated solely with the science and technology park. It's a requirement to resolve development growth generally in the Burgess Hill area. And the problem with funding such a scheme, if HE have not got funding for such a scheme, is the mechanism to do so. Because it is universal across all developments in Burgess Hill, the requirement is needed. Section 106 is inappropriate, and there isn't a SIL environment in place in Burgess Hill, and it's not included in the infrastructure delivery plan, which is before you as part of the DPD. The second point is just to come back on Tempro. Tempro includes the reference case. It therefore doesn't include the uncommitted elements of the local plan within the plan period, which the DPD seeks to allocate. So it's therefore incorrect for any modelling process to deduct from the Tempro forecasts for any site which is not a commitment in the reference case, and then add it back in, because that is a part of the DPD which is additional. But quite apart from that, I think, as Mr. Parfek has acknowledged, there is in that corridor congestion issues which will not be improved by the mitigation which is proposed as part of the DPD. And in fact, at the junction of Holders Lane and Keema Road will be worsened. Those are the points I wish to make.
Right, Heather, Sergeant QC, do come in.
Thank you, sir. I just have a very few brief points to make sure that what I said this morning hasn't been misunderstood or mischaracterised by any of the other participants. The first is that I think Mr. Black, what he did in his response to what we were saying on transport, said that, well, the distances you were referring to in relation to schools and such like are set out in our own transport statement. As far as we're concerned, the distances that he was referring to relate to SA12, not to SA13. And when Mr. Ruddock addressed you, he was obviously talking about SA13. So I hope that has cleared that up. Very briefly on the coalescence point, SOFLAG in response had a number of points about Wellhouse Lane, but my point was not simply premised on Wellhouse Lane, it was also relying on Keema Road and the development along there. So you will of course have seen that, sir, and I'd ask you just to have regard to the combination of both Kema Road and Wellhouse Lane when considering whether there's a coalescence issue here. And then, in terms of the national park, it was suggested that we're saying we shouldn't worry about the setting. Well, clearly that's not what we're saying at all. We've identified the sensitivity of the national park setting. We've assessed it. We say appropriately engaging qualified landscape consultants to do that. And you have the result of that assessment before you, sir. They are satisfied that the site does have capacity. There were no countervailing assessments by landscape consultants before you. And so I invite you to prefer their views over the views to the contrary that have been expressed. And then the very final point from me, sir, is Dr. Bowes referred to the Kidnappers Lane appeal decision and to a subsequent legal challenge. Those documents aren't before the inquiry. I would ask whether they could be sent in, just because I think in the interests of fairness, it would be appropriate for everyone to be able to look at those. And I'd like to make sure that I've been searching for and looking for the right thing. But I would also, in response to particularly the suggestion that the High Court has thought about this, refer you to there's a decision called Hawkhurst from the High Court from November last year, I think, which obviously I'm happy to provide as well to the inquiry. And the High Court there said that objection in principle to any further development affecting what was a junction of capacity issues is not consistent with paragraph 109 of the framework, because such a blanket objection would not recognise the potential for minor impacts to be addressed by mitigation measures such as public transport measures. And such a blanket objection would not be based on a case-by-case assessment of whether the particular impact caused by the particular development could be treated as severe. And the judge went on to say, in my judgment, paragraph 109 necessarily requires consideration of whether the residual cumulative impact of the proposed development is severe, not simply whether existing or projected congestion without that development would be severe. So I just wanted to draw that authority to your attention in response to SOFLAG's point before we broke for lunch. I think
very fairly argue, or you very fairly stated, the Kidnappers Lane one should be brought to my attention. So I think in fairness, I should see both of them. And I'm very happy to receive both those documents, and they should go in the on the council's website so that everybody can see them.
So thank you. I hope I spoke to Mr. Muirhead at lunchtime, and I think he had a couple of points that he would like to make in response to. I think Mr. News now had two further responses since this morning, so I'm sure he'll be brief, sir, but if he could be indulged just with a few points in response. It may be that actually the council's highways representative has picked up all of his points and he has nothing to add, but if I could just give him the opportunity. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Muirhead.
Thank you, sir. I will keep it brief. Obviously, I agree with the sentiment and the comments made by Mr. Perfect. There's just a couple of very minor points that I would like to add to. So one is respect to the A23, AT300 junction. You can refer to our representations, Matter 6 representations. We have there are traffic flow diagrams set out. Obviously, we've agreed those with West Sussex that set out the SA13 development traffic and how that routes through Burgess Hill to a point. If you look at the traffic flow diagrams, which are figures 9 and 10 in Appendix I of our Matter 6, Appendix 1, apologies, a lot of appendices there. But that demonstrates that on our assessment, the SA13 development would put at a point west of the railway station, which is a junction next to McDonald's car park, but it's a few hundred metres west of the railway station. That's as far as we took our analysis. But our analysis for the SA13 development traffic only puts 19 AM peak and 7 PM peak development vehicles heading west that would route towards the A23. Now, not all of that traffic would get to the A23. Some would route north to Haywards Heath, some would route to the A23 and head northbound, and some would head to the A23 and head southbound. So by the time you hit those three principal routes, the level of development traffic that will impact on the S1 with sites, junction sites, which is the A23 southbound on slip and widening for the A23 is quite small. So in terms of what Mr. Parfitt said, the S1 site mitigation set out by the sister report does not specifically say that it is solely to do with or mainly to do with the science part. Logic would dictate that it would be. It was merely me highlighting where you can review our development traffic to see in all likelihood how low our development traffic would be that would route onto that S1 junction. That's my first point. And the second point is just with respect to Mr. Parfitt's view and the table discussed with respect to sustainable transport and transfer onto sustainable transport. So the table 7 people were referring to earlier sets out for SA13 and a 1.5% reduction in vehicle trips for the sustainable transport improvements. The sustainable transport improvements and ideas thereof are set out in the infrastructure delivery plan. In part, there are proposals set out in the drawing that is appended to our Matter 6 highways reports. So there's footway improvements, room for a bus stop shelter, crossing points set out there. So there are elements of understood measures that could be brought forward with respect to sustainable transports. And I appreciate that Mr. Parfitt didn't want to state a number. I wouldn't specifically either with respect to transfer to sustainable modes, but I would say the 1.5% is very low. When this development comes forward for a plan application in due course, if it does, a travel plan would be expected to promote and aim towards a significantly higher number than 1.5%. In my experience of undertaking travel plans. So 1.5% mode shift is quite low. Thank you.
It's very helpful. Thank you. I've got no further questions. Ms. Sargent, did you want to say any more?
No, sir, that's everything from me. Thank you very much for your time.
You're right. Okay, I don't want to unnecessarily prolong this. We've had a full discussion, which has been helpful and fair. But if there are any final points, I will hear them briefly. Well, you've given me quite a lot to think about already. Right, okay, if there's no more on that, then we will meet tomorrow to discuss further SA sites. And again, we'll meet at 9:30. But for now, the examination hearings are closed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.